Good afternoon in the East, good morning in the West, and hello to those of you who are joining in the middle of the night from Asia. I see at least two or three people coming in from Asia, where it's a 12-hour or 13-hour time difference. Welcome to a discussion of who is using artificial intelligence in the United States and what it means to be human in the year 2035. This program is on the record and is being recorded. Video will be posted on the USC website after we're finished. Our next public programs will be our monthly Africa-US Forum on Monday, June the 2nd, on the African Union's theme for the year, reparations. And then on June 25th, we'll have a presentation of new data from a 24-country survey on how other countries view the United States. Now to today's forum and our guest Lee Rainie, longtime head of Pew Research on digital technology and the internet, longtime friend of these programs, and now he's at Elon University. We'll post his bio in the chat shortly, and most of you already have his bio courtesy of Judy's email. Lee will present two new reports. First, who is using AI, followed by Q&A, and then he'll present a second report, Being Human 10 years from now in 2035, followed by more discussion. So welcome back, Lee. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Adam. Any day spent with you is a better day, and I'm delighted to be with you and in this wonderful forum because it's been so good to me over the years, and I've just profited so much from my relationship with you and also this wonderful crowd that you are able to gather. I am going to be talking about these two separate pieces of work that we did at the center that I now run at Elon University, the Imagining the Digital Future Center, which is basically a carry-on from a bunch of the work that I was doing at the Pew Research Center. And those of you that kind of know that work and know that wonderful fact tank will see echoes of a lot of the stuff that I did in the past and that are the hallmark of the wonderful work that's done at the Pew Research Center. Elon University is a sort of middle-sized private liberal arts school in the middle central north of North Carolina, about 35 miles west of Durham and Chapel Hill. And I profit too from my relationship with the regional universities that are so important down there. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to describe this wonderful moment that I had that was, to me, emblematic of the sort of new communications reality that all of us face here, and the new ways that material can be rendered. We did a survey of several hundred experts about the future of being human, and I'll talk through that later on in the program here. But as is the case when we release new reports, we want to get attention for them. So we do a wide press outreach, we do wide social media contacts, we try to promote the material in as many forums as we can. And as we send it out to the wider world, it turns out that now one of the common things that happens, at least for some kinds of publications coming out of research centers like mine, is to turn them into podcasts, but they're AI-generated podcasts. There is no human involved in speaking or producing the material. It's all sort of kicked in by an AI system. You might be familiar with the notebook that Google folks put out a while ago. So it's not a necessarily new technology. It's probably close to a year old at this point, but it's a system in which you can enter a file, any kind of file, and it will kick out some information about the material in the file. So it's a great summary system, but it also will kick out audio files. And so clearly in some system like this, I don't know if it was actually Google Notebook, but in a system like this, somebody loaded our 286 page PDF, just a PDF, unstructured data, natural language, and things like that. They loaded it here, and then once you kick it out of the system in Notebook in Google, you get an option to choose whether you want to have a conversation around the material in the document. It's essentially offering you the opportunity to create a podcast around the document. So someone loaded it into this system and then put it out on YouTube as a publication from the system that they were. And here's what it sounds like.
AI Papers Podcast Daily. We have a really fascinating deep dive for you all today.
Yeah, this one is interesting.
So, you sent us this canvassing of all these like tech pioneers and builders and analysts from late 2024, early 2025. We can develop AIs that are truly aligned with our interest, as individuals and as a society, then
So that's enough of that. You get the picture. I mean, if you close your eyes and just listening, it sounds very conversational. And it sounds very human. There are strategic pauses in the conversation. There are occasional uhs and ums and sort of references to others. And it was put out on YouTube as part of a podcast about our report. And it's gathered a couple of hundred views, best I can tell from the YouTube data on it. But it's an amazing thing to have your work now sort of loaded into an AI system, have it turn into a podcast that's put out on the internet, and probably no human being was involved other than entering the file itself and potentially loading it onto YouTube. And we've gotten about a dozen of similar versions of this report put out in the world. So this is the new environment we're living in, and it's an interesting, challenging period. Now to the real program I'm going to present to you here. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a survey that we did of 500 large language model users. The central question we asked to get them into the survey itself was, do you use a large language model like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or Copilot? They said yes, then we entered them into this deeper survey about who they were and what they did and what they got out of it. And it's a representative sample. It's a scientifically done sample of LLM users. And we decided to call this report Close Encounters of the AI Kind because one of the sort of grand themes that came out of the report, the grand takeaways, was that lots of people are treating LLMs as social actors in their lives and social conveyors of information in their systems. So the big sort of headline number that we got was that more than half of American adults now are using large language models. As a matter of fact, about a month later, there was Canadian data showing that the number might have risen in Canada over 60%. So this is an adoption story that's astounding. ChatGPT came into the world on November 30th, 2022, and in basically a year and a half, more than half of the adults in the country were using it, and or systems like it, like Gemini, Copilot, or Claude. And by the time you get to that level of adoption of any kind of technology, the gender story has basically evened out. Usually men are earlier adopters, particularly of digital technology. But in this survey, we found very equal shares of men and women use the technologies. And some of the surprises in the data, if you look at the race and ethnicity data, this is not your typical digital divide story. Black users of LLMs and Hispanic users of LLMs are more likely than whites to be in that population. Now, education is another story. Usually better educated folks are more likely to be adopters of technology, and that story plays out here. But again, I call your attention to the household income data there, where the share of people who live in households earning less than $50,000 and the share of people living in households over $100,000 are equally likely to be LLM users. So that income, which is often a strong predictor of certain kinds of technology use, is no longer the case when it comes to LLMs. And our survey was representative, and it included people who don't work. And so much of the story in a lot of the early coverage of LLMs was that it's a workplace related thing, and lots of coverage, of course, about what's happening in schools related to LLMs. But it was striking to me that 4 in 10 of people who are not in the workforce, they're working at home, they're disabled, they're retired, or things like that, 4 in 10 are already using LLMs. So it is not very much a work-related story. It's a almost kind of universal story of use. And then one of the things that we found when I was working at the Pew Research Center, as we watched the internet and broadband and mobile connectivity roll out, is that a sort of new predictor of earlier adoption is being a parent of a minor child. There is a sense that these technologies are overtaking workplaces and schools and other kinds of parts of the culture, that parents in particular feel some sort of urgency to master them and make them available to their children. And again, sort of pushing against this narrative that AI is a workplace-related phenomenon, particularly LLMs. When we asked people about their main purpose they use LLMs, they cited personal informal learning rather than work-related things. And that was even true for workers. The workers who use LLMs are more likely to use them for personal informal learning than they are for work-related purposes. And of course, there's some school use, some social use, and some other kinds of purposes. But it was again striking that the story is one of informal, social kinds of engagement rather than work-related engagement. We broke that question apart in a little bit more greater detail. And again, sort of informal learning, amusing yourself, getting information for products and services, those were higher levels of engagement of people who had ever done these things on LLMs than work activities. And we began to use, and one of the things we did in this survey was we began to use a question battery that I used back in the early days of internet adoption about what other kinds of things were you using internet for, and in this case now LLMs for. And we're beginning to see significant chunks of the population using LLMs to get information about physical or mental health, about news and politics, about writing and creativity and things like that. So this is a general purpose, incredibly potent set of technologies that is, it's gonna look like the adoption of the internet, but on a much faster time scale and a much more extensive time scale than we were picking up in the early days. Again, when I picked up another question battery from my Pew Internet days, when we were sort of breaking apart different kinds of uses. At the top of this list here, there are the highest level of usage that we were getting on using LLMs for a task is using them as a search engine. This is an incredibly important and powerful story that, in some ways signals the death of the web as we knew it, as a publishing system, as an advertising system, as a recommender system, as obviously navigated by search engines and things like that. So there's a way in which these new systems, again, a year and a half old, not very old at all, are upending the web model that has been a commonplace for a couple of generations now. You can go down the rest of this list to show the variety of ways people are using, planning a trip, planning social gatherings and things like that. And one of my favorite questions from my Pew Internet days was to ask whether people had looked up themselves or looked up their friends and frenemies on this. And 1 in 5, 1 in 4 have looked up what other people say about them or looked up what LLMs have said about themselves. So there's a way in which these are becoming very popular kind of personal technologies that people are having some fun with and playing with. One of the grand readings we tried to get was how satisfied people were, because there are such interesting policy questions and such major concern about the performance of LLMs and making mistakes, hallucinating, maybe giving people bad information or sending them off on wrong information. And what we got here was a pretty decent level of satisfaction with the tools. I think, there's some level of people that understand that they should be wary and suspicious, or at least, check pretty diligently if they're going to make decisions and base things in their lives around these systems. But at this level of sort of basic satisfaction with a product that's still sort of finding its footing and finding there are plenty of ways that it's got some problems related to it, that was a striking finding. We also asked more specifically about were people satisfied with things, and they like the completeness of the answers that LLMs are giving them. They say that they're pretty accurate. They say that they're pretty fair. I think we got a little bit less than a majority view that it's following ethics. But if you asked folks even up, I mean, the plurality said they were somewhat or very satisfied. And of course, you see those gray numbers on the right-hand side there. Lots of people don't know. Even the LLM users are not necessarily sure how well these systems are performing for them. The other sort of beginning question we began to ask about the social uses of and the social interactions with the systems are, do you think it's smarter than you are, the most popular system that you're using? And 26% said a lot smarter than I am, and 23% said a little smarter, and about a fifth said about as smart as you. So there's a sense that there's a sort of new form of intelligence, new form of sort of social interactivity, new forms of engagement that are possible with these tools. And people, by and large, more than not, are thinking that they are performing at levels that are impressive as well as satisfying to them. Another way we asked about the sort of personal attributes or the social attributes of the systems was basically, did they give personalized answers to your prompts? And a significant share said at least a small amount that was the case. Do the systems learn from their encounters with you? Again, that's, a lot of people said at least by a small amount. Did they show the capacity to think and reason? Do they understand you? Do they make moral judgments? And again, sort of most people are saying that at least to some degree, these systems are performing this way. And and of course, they're early users. If you adopt a technology, you're basically making a bet that it's going to pay off for you, that it's going to have some value added to your life or make life easier in some way, shape, or form. So in a way, it's not surprising to see these kind of affirming judgments play out. But it's striking when so much of the policy commentary and the sort of social commentary about these systems is taking a pretty strong tone. And then we asked about personality traits. We just asked straight up, do you think these tools perform in this way for you? And a majority said they act in a confident way and provide constructive feedback. And many said they act like a good colleague at work, and they show a sense of humor and express curiosity and things like that. But there are also ways in which this sort of double-edged dimension of all kinds of technologies that we've studied over the years, but these AI systems as well, they can be sarcastic, they can express sadness, can be brusque, they can act in a jealous way. And so it's sort of this fuller picture of social interaction with these tools is beginning to emerge with these kinds of data. And we've asked some effects questions. Have these models affected them in a variety of ways? Have they improved or not their productivity and the times they spend on annoying tasks? And about half said they're spending less time on annoying tasks, which is, I guess, one of the big value propositions that AIs and especially generative AI systems are like. They do problem-solving skills. I was surprised at the creativity number. 42% said these systems improved a lot or somewhat their creativity, and just right under that is their communication skills. And so I don't think they're necessarily saying that I'm more creative than I used to be, or I've got new sort of add-ons to my creativity. I think they're giving an answer like I would have given if I had taken this survey, which is I can just explore new stuff. And it's easy to do. It doesn't take a lot of effort, at least to begin a query and to dive down a rabbit hole if you feel like it. And so I feel like I slake my curiosity a lot more now that these tools are available to me than I used to when it was a little bit harder to do that kind of search and that kind of query. And then we asked a bunch of questions about how the tools make them feel. And there are ways in which the tools don't work out so well for people. Half of the LLM users said they felt like they were being lazy or taking it too easy when they were using these tools. They felt like they were cheating. They felt frustrated or confused. They felt like they were becoming too dependent. And those numbers were pretty substantial and pretty interesting. So again, even as they are enthusiastic about these, even as they are sort of playing around in super interesting ways with these, there are ways in which they already can spot some of the sort of shadow dimensions of them. One of the most interesting things we asked before the whole flattery and sycophancy question started coming up with LLMs, Sam Altman changed OpenAI a couple of weeks ago, saying that there had been getting a lot of complaints that the tools were sycophants and overly flattering their users, and it was causing suspicions as well as other things in the system prompts that were given to things. So about a quarter, when we did this survey in January of 2025, felt that like they were being flattered. A quarter said they'd made a significant mistake or bad decision based on the material generated by the LLM. And a fifth said that they were manipulated. And then there were other ways in which they, expressed their concerns. And then we asked about the future. And those who are now familiar with LLMs, at least to some extent, had a pretty mixed verdict about what's likely to happen to people in the next 10 years as AI tools, particularly LLMs, play out through the culture. 28% said the outcome generally would be more positive than negative. 20% said more negative than positive. A third said equally positive and negative. So this split verdict is very familiar from other kinds of surveys that we've been doing related to language models. And I think, there's a very strong sense both among experts and users now that we're at an inflection point that these tools can go one way or another, and might turn out better if we make good decisions now and have good policies now, and might turn out worse if we have the bad stuff. And so again, in the next 10 years, we asked about sort of different kinds of outcomes. Excuse me. Wow, sorry. And so they're one of the strong consistent readings we've gotten both at Pew Research and now at Elon at the Imagining the Digital Future Center. Lots of hope about scientific breakthroughs that'll come through general general AI tools and LLM tools more particularly. And there's a majority thought that we humans would still retain control over the system. But they have a sense that these tools are going to change the way people spend their leisure time, maybe change the kind of work that people do, and that they would form deep relationships with humans. 38% said it's very likely in the next 10 years that these tools would, that humans would form deep relationships with them. And there's also this darker side that is, very much in evidence as we do this kind of survey work. People are worried about the social isolation that might come from them. They're obviously concerned and have been for a long time about the potential loss of jobs. There's a sense that the intelligence, broadly speaking, artificial general intelligence or superintelligence will come to pass. And there will be a factor in contributing to serious social upheaval. And eventually that LLMs will develop their own identity and goals. How's that for freaking things out at the end of this presentation? So that's that survey that we did of language model users in the here and now. And I thought it would be a good moment to see what questions you had about that before I get into the more futurism stuff in the next presentation.
Thank you, Lee. And it's very interesting that you're painting a picture here of a technology which, as you point out, in just a year and a half has had an incredible penetration, but also has become very much companions.
And Adam, the other thing that's really different about LLMs, even from the other digital technologies, the other three revolutions I've been privileged to cover in my research life, the broadband revolution, mobile connectivity revolution, and the social media revolution, this AI stuff is being baked into the tools that people already use. And so another battery that I didn't show a graphic here on, but we asked people, do you use AI in your email system, in your social media system, as you create PowerPoints, as you're using photo editing tools and things like that? And a lot of people are doing that. So my guess is that, first of all, even for the January numbers I'm presenting here, 52% of adults use this. I bet you substantially more use LLM systems that are already part of the normal, average, very easy to use digital systems that they already use. The other thing that, of course, is going on is that there are custom models that are now just incredibly proliferating. We're in a Cambrian moment where the number of models, the number of specialized models, the number of business product models and things like that are also proliferating. And we only asked about, the main language model systems, but there are now sort of deeply customized, and everybody on this program can create their own language model right now with the tools that are being offered by the major systems.
We're getting a number of questions now, but first, let's go to one that's just addresses methodology. What are the sample sizes in your survey?
This was done with a web panel run by the polling firm SSRS. It's a scientific sample of adults. They drew from 1,500 people to get the overall sample for how many people were LLM users, and then the particular uses of LLM and the particular attitudes about LLMs, that was from a 500-person sample. So the margin of error is about 5% for the LLM sample, and it's about 2.5%, 3% for the overall sample that we use to gather these data.
Here's a question. I don't know if people want to be identified by name, but I just know that this person is or has been on the Artificial Intelligence Task Force of the American Bar Association. And he asked in April of 2025, so last month, the British judiciary advised judges that AI tools are a poor way of conducting research to find new information you cannot verify independently. They may be useful as a way to be reminded of material you would recognize as correct. Does your research distinguish responses on accuracy as to whether humans use Gen AI and assess its accuracy about things they know a lot about or not much about? In other words, were the respondents really well positioned to assess the accuracy of the responses they were getting from the technology?
It's a fabulous, important question. And I would say, using the questioner's own words, they were not well prepared to answer these questions sort of super accurately. And so many times when you're doing polling work on any kind of thing, particularly since the rise of misinformation and disinformation, when the provenance of information was so important to figure out whether people were doing, this is self-reports. And we didn't fact check people, and we didn't go any more deeply into, how do you know for sure that the things that it's reporting to you are accurate? And probably even at the level of the individual user, I would guess that it's likely that to the degree that the user feels more confident and even has more expertise in certain areas, they might be pretty confident about the accuracy or not of news information, but not necessarily about health information or shopping information, as opposed to information about mental health or things like that. So the shorter answer is, we're not sure how confident people are. They are pretty confident that the things that they're getting are accurate. And another battery I didn't show you, though, is that we're beginning to see some evidence that people are using these tools for making major decisions in their life. If they're thinking about career change, or they're thinking about investments, or they've got a health problem that they want to research. It's not overwhelming numbers now, but just like the early days of the internet, these things are now becoming a commonplace. And it's, a lot of people in the world of experts are quite worried about the effects of this.
Let's try to get in a couple of quick questions before you go to part two. Here's one from, I will use his name, Marvin Kell, our former colleague. Is it possible that artificial intelligence can determine whether we go to war? Evidence can be manipulated.
In the wider world, not in my research, but in the wider world, that's a big concern. Autonomous weapon systems are sort of out there. There's always the Skynet possibility from the Matrix and things like that. Obviously, the Ukraine war has been a big learning environment for the new ways of waging war with drones and other kinds of automated technologies. So I don't know. I think there are a lot of experts who are worried about this, and a lot of experts who are spending their time stress testing the systems, or figuring out the degree to which they are aligned with human values or not. And of course, more than anyone probably on the screen, Marvin, you would know the degrees to which that the systems can have accidents, and people can make mistakes, and people using systems can make mistakes. And it's a constant worry on a lot of people's minds.
Let's get in one more question before we get to part two. We're saving all your questions because some of these are particularly relevant to the second part of Lee's presentation. Here's one. Someone said, I use Google for a lot to search scientific topics. Whenever AI is on Google is effective, is often helpful and saves time. However, when I need numeric answers, it's not very helpful.
Yeah, one of the sort of big early disclosures as these language models came out is they don't do math very well at all. They're getting better at it. There are ways in which the multimodal capacities of these models are also sort of, adapting to other kinds of inputs and stuff like that. But it's doing math is not its strong suit. Coding is a wonderful thing that these tools are doing, and there's a lot of evidence that it's improving people's codings. It's improving coding in autonomous systems and things like that. But yeah, there are buyer beware is always a good caution to have, even from the days of the early search engines and things like that. And yet you can just see over time, as we saw with search engines and Wikipedia, if you can remember those debates about how accurate or not that was, there are ways in which those systems become a normalized part of the process of information searching and provenance and judgments that people make. And the most discerning, the omnivorous information consumers have lots of ways that they can cross-check information. And there are people who default to the information they get out of systems. And it's always going to be true. And it's particularly true and worrisome about the AI tools that are now, sweeping through the culture.
For those of you who are joining us, and many have joined us in the last 10, 15 minutes, the entire video of this forum will be posted on our website. So you can go back and see what you missed, or you can go back and see it again if you want. So Lee, with that, why don't we go to what it's going to be like to be human in 10 years?
So this is a very different kind of thing. We don't even call it a survey because it's not scientific. It's a canvassing of experts. We have a database of several thousand experts who are in the AI world, sometimes experts about technology, sometimes they're academics who study technology. They're oftentimes pioneers or builders of technology. So it's an eclectic, diverse bunch of people. It tends to be North American, but there are global South participants, European and Asian participants in the process. And it's a widespread canvassing of experts. And we asked them about what these tools are going to be doing to people over the next 10 years. And so the starting point was a canvassing we did last year, which sort of was a map for the survey we were doing this year, where a big takeaway when we were asking about the impact of AI on individuals and on societal systems was this insight that there will be an ever-shifting boundary between what's human intelligence and what's machine intelligence. And the words we used to describe that theme was we're going to have to reimagine what it is to be human, because these tools have the capacity to challenge and sort of expand the core questions about what it is to be human, who we are. I mean, what happens to people when superior intelligence is all around us? It's not ubiquitous necessarily, and it's not intelligent in every possible way than humans are, but it's clear that ubiquitous levels of intelligence are a reality that's in the not distant future. It's going to affect what we do. There are ways in which, both in this survey and the previous one, lots of experts were saying that AI companions, AI assistants, AI agents in one way, shape, or form are going to be part of our lives and represent us in certain ways and help us in other kinds of ways. So that will be a big challenge to us. It becomes a big question about how we connect. I mean, at the level of, the things that you care about, Adam, in this group, news itself, the capacity of these tools to create at scale levels of information that seems credible and seems to have a accurate provenance. We're just, the fact that we are going to have to wonder now, does something come from a human being, or does it come from an agent acting on behalf of a human being, or an agent trying to mess everything up with human beings? That's going to be an enormous problem and an issue for how we connect, and of course how we think. When cognition, bigger, better, stronger, faster cognition is around us, how are we going to exploit or be taken advantage of by these new tools? So that was kind of where we came out as we were beginning to do this survey. And so we asked sort of big questions at first, whether people think, whether these experts, again, a convenient sample of experts, but whether they think the scale of change, how that's going to play out. And what we got was 61% saying the change would either be dramatic, which we described as fundamental and revolutionary change, or it would be considerable, which we described as deep and meaningful change, rather than moderate or noticeable change, barely perceptible change, and inconsequential change. So there's a sense that the world ahead is one where lots is going to be upended. There are lots of disruptions on the way. There are lots of ways that we're reimagining who we are is part of the package. And then we asked sort of which the scale, the direction of the change. And again, we got this verdict as we got when we asked the general population about the scale of change. Some people think it's for the better. Some people think it's for the worse. A lot of these experts said that it will be for the better and for the worse. And they elaborate on this in the written answers they give us to open-ended questions. So there's a lot of qualitative material that we pulled together in this report, which ended up being 286 pages long. And the centerpiece of the work that we did was around the traits that people talk about when they think that humans still have contributions to make, that as AI gets better, there will always be particularly special, potentially unique, and wonderful sort of grand ways in which humans, in their intelligence, their consciousness, their socialness, have special things to contribute. I remember when we first did, again, a convenient sample of experts on this, in 2013, we asked what's going to happen to jobs. Will more jobs be created than not? Or vice versa? And there was a split verdict heading into the future. Half these experts said more jobs would be created, half said more jobs would be lost. And when we asked them to elaborate on their answers, they always talked about soft skills. Those skills that are not necessarily wired into mathematical or even scientific, hard science kinds of propositions. It's stuff like social intelligence and emotional intelligence. It's stuff like critical thinking and stuff like making decisions on the fly and gathering resources for that. So we asked about those special traits. We asked about 12 different traits and capabilities that are sort of specially human. And we asked, are things going to turn out mostly negative or mostly positive? And on 9 of the 12 traits that we asked about, these experts were pretty convinced that things would be more negative than not. So even on the soft skills that many people are banking on humans remaining relevant and humans not being made obsolete, there's concern about such things as the impact of these tools on social and emotional intelligence, capacity and willingness to think deeply about complex concepts. I mean, in a way, that's our longer version of talking about critical thinking. Trust in widely shared values and norms. So again, going back to the sort of social constructs that humans have put together and have brought us to the top of the food chain in many respects. What would happen with these tools in terms of their impact on their confidence and humans have in their own native abilities, and these experts think it'll be more negative than positive. Again, more negative than positive on empathy and the application of moral judgments, and then mental well-being, sense of agency, sense of identity and purpose, and metacognition. Metacognition was an interesting one, thinking about thinking. There was definitely a plurality of these experts saying that the metacognition would be affected for the worse. I mean, that humans would be less good in the future about thinking about their own motivations, their own blind spots, their own capacity to reason, the ways in which they needed to amplify their cognition as they were going along. But metacognition was sort of more on the split verdict side than many of the other things. In 8 of these 9 things, the experts are pretty convinced that things are going to turn out worse than turn out better, which is kind of shocking to us. But they also said, and in a way, this speaks to the care in which they answered our questions, and there were nuances in their answers. The plurality said they expect change will be mostly positive in curiosity and capacity to learn, decision-making and problem-solving, and innovative thinking and creativity. Now, one of the big debates that we had as we were constructing this battery was whether to include the idea of leadership in the special human traits or not. And frankly, as a poll question writer, I wasn't convinced I could write a good survey question or a good canvassing question that would yield discriminating, thoughtful, nuanced answers. I just wasn't sure that I could do that. And so we didn't put leadership on our list. And yet, in the answers to the other things that we mentioned on curiosity, decision-making, and creativity, these experts absolutely gave us the roadmap to what leadership is. And so they were saying that some of the stuff that survives well in an environment of co-learning, co-intelligence, co-evolution of human and artificial intelligence, that the sort of special capacities of leaders are going to be amplified and maybe then will help us get through the problems that we might be experiencing on those other 9 attributes. So that was a bit of an encouraging thing. There were some narratives in this that sort of crossed a bunch of those dimensions. They talk again about human key traits being reshaped, and a sort of overview idea here was that some humans are going to get amplified, expanded, improved by these by the access to these tools. But a lot of people eventually are going to lose heart or just defer to the tools and not necessarily think that they have the capacity to affect them. There was a lot of commentary about people rethinking their purpose and their quest for meaning in life. I mean, you think about Americans and the degree to which Americans, when you ask them who they are, they talk about their jobs. And it's such a core part of their identity. And if there are lots of jobs that are disrupted or even eliminated by these tools, what's going to happen? And of course, we've seen sort of a prelude to the dark side of this with the deaths of despair that we see, particularly in the American Midwest, as manufacturing jobs were hollowed out in the past generation, and death rates increased for several of the groups that were, dependent on and satisfied with those manufacturing jobs. And I guess the final one I'll mention down here is human relations will be transformed as AI agents and companions enter the social world. So again, our agents will be dealing with each other. One of my favorite predictions in this was that the best-selling novel of the year 2035, so the out year that we asked about in the election, the best-selling novel would be written by an AI, and the major purchasers of it would be AI agents acting on behalf of other people. The AI agents would then do what AI agents do, which is summarize the basic points of the book and the plot line and stuff like that. And then eventually some of the material might work its way back into the human cognition. And so if you look at those 12 traits that I went through before, I hope you could hear them. The ones that where experts thought that the impact would be more negative than positive tended to be emotional, social, internal, intrinsic kinds of traits. People going into their own selves, into their own explorations of who they are and what they do and how they interact with the world. And the positive, the skills that struck them as potentially turning out more positively are instrumental, external, actionable skills. These are things that humans use to create things, to interact with each other, to act on in the first place and make decisions around in the first place. So again, I return to this idea that maybe leadership, particularly organized around creativity, curiosity, and decision-making, is the salvation that might be the AI solution to things that humans draw upon. And I will stop sharing there and start hearing people's questions.
We have a quick question about your methodology again. In either your survey, part 1, or the expert panel, part 2, were those entirely in the US or were some international? In
the representative sample of adult users of LLMs, it was all American adults. In the canvassing, it's a wide open canvassing with experts we've identified and experts have been recommended to us. The plurality were North Americans, but there were a considerable number of European contributors and Asian contributors, and a modest number, but a representation from the global South as well. So it was it's a convenient sample. People opted into doing it. We're not pretending that the findings are statistically, rock solid and things like that.
And a related question, do you have any information about similar surveys of people in other countries?
There was Canadian data that came out about a month after we released our LLM data in March, and it was very parallel to ours. I mean, Canadians often show these exact same adoption patterns of digital technologies that we do. The European data are, nobody's been asking these kind of questions. And in part because from a survey perspective, it's really hard to ask about artificial intelligence generally because it's ubiquitous. And as a matter of fact, Gallup did a wonderful survey that they published maybe 2 months ago saying that almost everyone uses AI. If you use a GPS, if you do a book recommender system, if you in a million ways, AI system, and if you use social media, it's humming away in the background and you don't know it. You don't think of yourself as an AI user. So one of the reasons we really focused on LLMs and tried to pin people down on that is because it's still a sort of discrete application of AI that people could talk about. They know whether they've subscribed to ChatGPT or Gemini. They know whether they are paying for those systems. So that's a good thing. But in general, asking people about AI, It's really hard to get readings. And one of the things that we decided early on in our research when we were doing this at Pew, starting about 5 years ago, we decided that the most useful questions apply to specific contexts and specific kinds of AI systems rather than general AI systems. And so we asked about medical systems, and we asked about social media systems, and we asked about face recognition and things like that, because people could speak about that rather than the general ways in which they may or may not know AI is working its way into their lives.
A question from one participant asking whether people seem to be aware that different LLMs give different answers.
We didn't ask that question, but yes, there's a general sense, when you're talking around about this, people have a sense. And what we found was about half of those LLM users were using multiple LLMs. So at some level they definitely have a preference for one. We could pin them down on that. And ChatGPT was the number one system that was the preferred system. But you can imagine people sort of playing with different answers and trying to get different things out of them. And the other thing that's so interesting now that was really different from the early studies I was doing of other digital technologies like broadband and social media, there is an infrastructure now, a big, extensive, robust, powerful infrastructure of a suspicion that surrounds AI systems that didn't exist at the dawn of social media or some of the earlier digital platforms. And it's a sort of a legacy of social media where after a couple of years of use, people began to see that there were externalities that were not good. And you got a very different kind of culture out of systems that prioritized attention and engagement over other kinds of human interactions with information. And so there now exists a very quick acting and very powerful infrastructure of suspicion and wariness and kicking the tires and trying to red team things and raising sort of basic questions almost the minute that new models are released. And so I think that carries on into the general user population where people, kind of play with it and see what they can make it do and see if they can get it to give stupid answers and things like that. But we don't know for sure whether people are testing them against each other.
Not unrelated, is there an implicit finding that humans who find the responses accurate and creative may be reflecting what OpenAI predicted back in March of 2023, namely that as the tools improve, humans will be at risk of over-reliance on them and fail to be as attentive to errors and inaccuracies?
That is absolutely a recurring theme and refrain in the expert answers that we were asking about these human capacities. And across the board, it applied to human agency as well as social intelligence, as well as critical thinking and things like that. There's a very strong sense among people who are really watching carefully these experts that people are going to defer to these systems, particularly as they get better and better. And to the degree that social media was characterized by optimization of attention and engagement, and we saw some of the problems that can come from that. The new add-on, in addition to attention and engagement, I mean, the AI companies that built social media know that game. But the new thing that is baked into the rollout, particularly of the commercial applications of AI, is optimizing for intimacy. These companies want these tools to be trusted and trustworthy, and to be treated in ways that people will defer, or not necessarily defer to them, but trust them to make engagements on their behalf in the world, to buy things on their behalf, to explore things on their behalf, to engage with others on their behalf. And so there's a sense, particularly among the experts who we talk to, that probably the majority portion of humans will defer, particularly as the tools get better and better. And the skepticism will fall, and the ways in which the reliance and dependence that humans have will grow over time. We haven't seen that yet. There are not enough studies of the kind that we're doing to show change over time. But I mean, it's clearly the case that all technologies that eventually get embraced by their cultures, and this is going to be one, become normalized over time. And to the degree that anything becomes normal, it becomes sort of default trusted. And that's one of the big concerns these experts have.
Question, did anyone express concern about the impact on the environment? We know that these systems require a lot of energy.
In both surveys, we picked that up. In the general survey of LLM users, that's not necessarily a top of mind concern, but they're pretty aware of the extent to which the electricity system and the water system are implicated in producing these materials. We heard from some people, a very small number, who said they minimize their use because of their concerns related to that. And so it's definitely on people's minds. But when we asked them, how do you make policy around that? The majority answer was, we hope the companies will deal with it themselves. We don't want the government to start making policy around that yet, which is kind of surprising to me. I thought it might turn out the other way. But in many cases, the public defers to the technology companies as the experts who are doing this. There's a American sort of classic suspicion of government and things like that. So I think that's partly going on too. But yes, the energy implications and water impact of these tools is on people's minds, and then the experts, it's very high ranking in their concerns.
A question from a colleague in Los Angeles. Were there any insights related to how LLMs or AI tools are perceived and utilized across industries, especially among nonprofit segments, higher ed, healthcare, human services, arts, culture, or so on? Does that seem to be an area which is being affected more differently than others?
Yes, I mean, some experts were talking about that, and they sort of parse different industry segments and different civil society segments and things like that. There's a sense that sort of pervades these data, though, that this is a general purpose technology that is going to be used for general purposes, which by definition means across the board. There's a sense that came out of longstanding research in the internet era that nonprofits, government agencies themselves, smaller companies are not going to necessarily be the early adopters and the early sort of winners in applications of this stuff. And yet, again, sort of in this moment where so much is happening so fast, it just didn't have this pace at all at the turn of the millennium when the internet, broadband, and mobile connectivity were charging ahead. There's a sense that your adoption is essential, or at least exploration is essential, and adoption is probably not going to be discretionary. It's going to have to be customized for different purposes. I sit in a university now, and the conversation in higher education in particular, but throughout the education environment, is all over the place. There's a sense that it's the Cambrian moment when lots of interesting stuff is being done and experiments are being made. There's a sense that cheating is rampant, and that the disruptions to teachers' lives, particularly as they're sitting in classrooms now trying to think about how do we convey mastery of a subject, or how do we test student proficiency in a subject. There's just sort of this upside down quality to lots of the conversations that are taking place in education. Whereas in healthcare, there are just incredible numbers of people who can tell you chapter and verse for their domain how this is making a difference. And I haven't explored the broader science world with that level of exploration, but my sense is throughout science, the enthusiasm for these tools is considerably broader than it is for social sciences and humanities.
And we've been surprised in our USC Africa US initiative to find AI being used in Africa for different purposes, and for some mainly healthcare, looking at huge data sets, but also worrying about AI and elections. In fact, we were approached by universities in Africa to help organize a conference on this. So these are not just the US or even northern developed concerns. A question on whether philosophical, moral, and or spiritual realms are being affected by AI. Did those come up?
But there's a very strong sense that they've got things to say about what's going on, and there's sort of an interesting movement across the domains in the question, in having representation as the models are being built or as the models are being tested in all of those domains. There's a sense that technologists, engineers are in charge, and that there aren't enough sort of human sensibilities in the process of building them and testing them inside the companies and things like that. So there's a sense that there's underrepresentation in all of those domains. And there's a sense that those domains have a lot to say and a lot to teach about how they play out in the realms that we were talking about, those special human dimensions and skills and traits that everybody, I think, thinks would be well to preserve and well to uphold and well to bring to the table as these things are building out. I mean, and so there's a sense that everybody belongs at this party, in part because everybody is going to be affected by this.
Interesting that the new Pope, Pope Leo, his first major concern that he expressed was about AI and its effect on us all.
Which is another carry-on from Pope Francis's. I mean, the Vatican is studying this very intensively, and technology leaders from around the world have been in meetings, both at the Vatican and other places, about all this. In part because the stakes are that big. For are we going to become obsolete? Do humans have a future?
Quick related question: what is the level of confidence that effective guardrails can be established?
I would say that the experts who tend towards the academy they're not technologists, but there's skepticism about that, particularly about guardrails at several levels. First of all, that they'll even be cared about, that they will be part of both the building process as well as the public release process. But there's just this sense in some quarters of the technology world and the critics of technology that there are just things that aren't yet understood about how these models perform, and the degree to which they are hiding things from us, and the degree to which they are capable of things that they haven't yet sort of shown themselves to be capable of. And so that's a lot of the concern and criticism comes from the quarter of sort of, we know there are mysteries, and it's probably not going to be good if we can't figure those out.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time. I've just put into chat the next two forums that we'll be doing on June 2nd on the African Union's year of their theme for this year is reparations. And speakers will include the former chief economist of the African Export-Import Bank, and then Lee, somebody who you know well at Pew, the director of Global Attitudes Research, will be with us again to present data from their new, I think they're still working on it, the 24-country survey of how people around the world view the United States. And before we go, I just want to share one memory and get your reaction to it. 60 years ago, amazing to say, I was an undergraduate, and I used to go to Marvin Minsky's robot lab and some of the other early things that we would now call artificial intelligence. And the offices were lined with books. They were science fiction books. And finally, I got the nerve to ask one of the senior people there, why do you have all these science fiction books? And he said, where do you think we get all of our ideas? We have to have Isaac Asimov's 3 rules of robots programmed into everything. Your thoughts?
I've heard that was such concern any number of points in the past that the vastly prevailing view of science fiction or tone of science fiction was dystopian. And that to the degree that everybody understood that these were essentially roadmaps to the future of the builders of real technology, there was a concern about that. And at some points, I think it's the case that there were even prizes being offered for utopian versions of the world, just so that the roadmaps would be easier and as robust as the dystopian worlds. The other book that I would commend to people as they think about this is a thought experiment by Nick Bostrom, who wrote the original book on superintelligence, that was a critical book and worried a lot about the killer paperclip epidemic that AIs would inflict on us and things like that. He's written a book called Utopia, and it's a thought experiment about how humans perform in what he calls a solved world, where AI systems and others take care of most human problems and human needs. he asked the question, where will we get purpose and meaning and meaningful social interaction out of those things? And it's a good thing to be pondering even today.
Well, thank you so much, Lee Rainie, for joining us again. We hope you'll come back with new insights on AI and more.
Count on it.
And again, June 2nd, we will have experts from Africa talking about their views of reparations. And June 25th, Richard Wyke from the Pew Research Center on a 24-country survey of global attitudes toward the United States. Until then, thank you for coming, and we're adjourned.